A cowboy pulls up a bucket from the well, but instead of water, he finds blood and a body. Today, True Wild West Stories brings you the chilling tale of Caleb Whitmore, a young rancher who uncovered a secret buried deep beneath his land, one that shook an entire town and tested where folks really stood. What if the real killer wasn't just a man, but a whole system? The metal bucket clanged against the stone rim as Caleb yanked it up, sweat dripping down his temple in the early morning sun. He expected the familiar slosh of clear water, but instead, a thick, rust-colored liquid surfaced with a sharp, metallic stench that clawed at his throat. The moment he looked into the bucket, his stomach turned. The water wasn't just murky, it was red, laced with something more than just silt or rust. He stumbled back, dropping the rope, wiping his mouth with the sleeve of his shirt. The well had always been their lifeline. His mama used to say, "So long as the well runs clean, we're safe." But she was gone now, and what rose from that darkness felt like a warning. "Ezekiel," he hollered, voice cracking. His father was already limping out of the barn, wiping grease from his palms, brow furrowed before he even saw what was wrong. "What in God's name?" Ezekiel started, then froze beside the well. The air between them thickened as they both stared into the bucket, now sitting in the dirt like it had crawled out of hell. "Something's wrong down there," Caleb muttered, kneeling to peer into the well shaft. He squinted against the shadows, catching only the faint glimmer of red-tinged water. But there was something more, a shape just below the surface. His heart knocked against his ribs. "We should call someone," Caleb said, standing. "Sheriff Hale." Ezekiel's face twitched. "No need to stir trouble. Might just be a fox or some poor stray." Caleb stared at him. "You think a fox bleeds that much?" Ezekiel looked away, jaw tight. "Things go wrong, don't mean it's our place to fix it." But Caleb had already grabbed the old floodlight from the porch. Minutes later, he was lowering it down the well on a cord, his boots braced against the rim. The light dipped, swayed, then stilled. What it illuminated made his breath stop. A body, face bloated, one arm floating, oddly twisted. A wide-brimmed hat still clung to the head. Caleb didn't recognize him at first, until he saw the patch on the jacket. A faded county road crew badge. "Jonas Kepler," he whispered. "Worked highway maintenance. Disappeared months ago." Ezekiel stepped back like the well had spat fire. "Pull it up. Pull the damn light up!" They stood in silence for a long moment. By midday, Sheriff Hale arrived in a dust-coated cruiser, sunglasses perched on his nose, thumb hooked in his belt. He looked into the well, nodded slowly, then turned to Caleb. "You sure that's Jonas?" "I'm not sure of anything," Caleb said, arms crossed. "But there's a dead man in our well. I figure that warrants attention." Hale took off his glasses. His eyes were unreadable. "You didn't touch the body?" "No." "Then let it lie for now. I'll file a report. Might be the water turned him, unrecognizable. Could be someone else." Caleb frowned. "You're not going to get it out?" Hale kicked at the dirt. "You stir up a mess like this, people start pointing fingers. Let me talk to the coroner. Meanwhile, keep this quiet. You hear?" "Quiet," Caleb snapped. "There's a corpse in the damn water we drink." Ezekiel cleared his throat behind him, low and uneasy. Hale stepped in closer, lowering his voice. "Don't go playing detective, son. Folks like the Keplers, they find their own trouble." When the cruiser pulled away in a trail of dust, Caleb stood there, jaw clenched, fists at his sides. Ezekiel said nothing, just went back to the barn with a limp that seemed heavier than before. That night, the wind had changed. The house creaked, windows rattled slightly in their panes. Caleb sat on the porch with a shotgun across his lap, staring out at the well. The red water had been left untouched, roped off with a frayed length of twine. Like that would stop the nightmares crawling out of it. He hadn't eaten. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, that swollen face floated up in the darkness behind his eyelids. Then he heard it, a low scrape, like nails across stone. He stood up slowly, scanning the yard. The chickens were asleep. The barn door swayed once, then stilled. But the noise had come from the well. He was sure of it. Caleb walked to the edge, shotgun raised, heart thudding. Nothing, just the wind. But the rope on the bucket was swinging gently, and no one had touched it. The porch boards groaned beneath Caleb's boots as he burst through the front door, shotgun still in hand. The moon cast a pale silver sheen across the yard, etching long shadows of the oak trees into the dry, cracked dirt. He scanned the darkness, his breath held tight in his chest. The rope on the well had stopped swinging. Everything stood still, too still. Then he saw it, a flutter near the edge of the fence line. Something small, caught on a sliver of branch. Caleb moved fast, vaulting the steps, his boots thudding across the dirt. He reached the spot just as the wind pulled the fabric free. With one swift motion, he snatched it from the air. It was a handkerchief, cream-colored, soft to the touch, embroidered in one corner with a crisp red letter, H. He stood there, turning it over in his hand. The stitching was fine, too fine for anyone local. The kind of thing you found in a city man's pocket, not a rancher's. Caleb looked out into the brush beyond the fence, narrowing his eyes. He'd heard something. He knew it. And now this. He paced the edge of the yard, searching for more signs, footprints, broken twigs, anything, but the ground was dry and hard, too stubborn to reveal secrets. Whoever had been there was gone. Back on the porch, Caleb sat heavily on the steps, the handkerchief clenched in his fist. A whisper of wind stirred the trees, and the faint rustle made the night feel less like a silence and more like a warning. H. His mind jumped, uninvited, to a meeting from weeks ago. A black SUV had rolled up the dirt road, tires spitting dust, air conditioning still humming when the driver stepped out. 3 men, all clean boots and pressed collars. They'd introduced themselves as representatives of Halberg Mining, said they were interested in buying local land, offered twice the going rate for dry lots, said there were minerals underground. Not much of interest for ranchers, but plenty for them. Caleb had declined. Ezekiel, too. They didn't trust suits who smiled too much and smelled like cologne instead of sweat. Most of Dry Creek had done the same. Land here wasn't just dirt. It was bone. It was graveyards and stories and memories built into every fence post. But some folks had sold, quietly, without saying a word. Now, here he was, holding a handkerchief that might as well have been a flag. The H burned in his palm like a brand. He stood again, walked to the well, and looked down into its black, yawning mouth. The air rising from it no longer smelled like water, but like rot and rusted chains. The sheriff hadn't come back. No coroner, no investigators, just silence. Caleb felt the twist in his gut. Fear, yes, but something else too, something raw, a knowing that crept along his spine like the slow movement of a snake. He wasn't crazy. Someone had been here, watching, listening, maybe more than once. He took the handkerchief inside, washed the dirt from it in the sink, then laid it flat on the kitchen table. The red thread of the H gleamed under the bare bulb. He stared at it long enough to forget the time. When he finally looked up, the night had deepened. Outside, the moon hung heavy, casting everything in a bleached, eerie glow. Ezekiel didn't stir. The old man hadn't said a word since Hale left. Caleb guessed he didn't want to. He didn't want this burden. But Caleb knew something had shifted. Something had crossed their threshold. This wasn't about a body in a well anymore. It was about why, and who, and what the hell they wanted with this land. He stood again, slower this time, and walked to the coat rack. He tucked the handkerchief into the inside pocket of his jacket, where it sat like a secret. Then he walked out onto the porch, sat in the same spot as before, shotgun resting across his lap again. "I'll find out," he murmured to the dark. "One way or another." The shadows didn't answer, but the silence felt like approval. The smell of strong coffee filled the kitchen, mingling with the creak of old floorboards and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Caleb sat at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, steam brushing his face. Across from him, Ezekiel sipped slowly, eyes distant, as if staring through the window but seeing nothing. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant. Caleb rose and opened the door to find Martha Dillard, bundled in a faded shawl, despite the growing warmth, holding a pie tin wrapped in a clean checkered cloth. "Well now," she said with a familiar smile. "Figured a couple of stubborn Whitmore men might need something warm to go with all that brooding." "Morning, Martha," Caleb said, stepping aside. She entered without waiting to be asked. Like always, the house smelled of dust and pine cleaner, but Martha's presence brought something gentler. She set the pie on the counter and unwrapped it. Apple by the look and smell of it. Homemade. Always was. "I heard," she said softly, glancing at Ezekiel. "Heard what?" Caleb asked, leaning against the counter. Martha gave him a long look over her glasses. "Don't play coy, son. This town may be spread thin, but word still runs faster than wildfire. Folks talking about your well." Ezekiel made a noise low in his throat, a mix between a grunt and a sigh. "Didn't think we were making headlines," Caleb said. "You're not. Yet," she replied. "But Tom at the hardware store mentioned the sheriff stopped by, and Jenny at the diner said Hale's been acting funny all week." Caleb didn't answer. He poured her a cup of coffee instead and set it in front of her at the table. Martha took it gratefully, hands cradling the warm ceramic. After a pause, she looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Last Thursday," she began, "I was walking to the chicken coop after supper. Sun just slipping past the hills. I saw someone moving along your south fence. Too far to tell who, but not someone I recognized. Didn't walk like a local. Had a sort of hurry to him." Nervous Caleb's heart tightened. "You sure it wasn't one of our hands? You don't have hired hands anymore, hun," she reminded gently. "Not since spring." Ezekiel cleared his throat but stayed quiet. Caleb sat down slowly. "You tell anyone?" Martha shook her head. "Didn't seem like my place. But after hearing about the body and seeing your face this morning, thought you ought to know." For a moment the kitchen held a silence thick as molasses. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small and folded. A photograph, old and faded. She slid it across the table. "That's my Henry," she said. "Taken in 1989, right before the cave-in." Caleb picked it up. The man in the photo wore a miner's helmet, one arm slung over a coworker's shoulder. Both men coated in soot but smiling wide. "He worked for Hellberg," she added, "back when it was still just a mid-size outfit, back before they got teeth." Caleb's eyes flicked up. You think this ties to Halberg? I think Halberg's been sniffing around this county a long time, she said, and when they don't get what they want the friendly way. She let the thought hang in the air. Outside, a crow cawed. Somewhere down the road, a truck engine turned over and rumbled away. Life carried on, but something in the world had shifted. Caleb could feel it in the way the air tasted. You're not alone in this, Martha said, placing a gentle hand over his. Don't let hail make you feel like you are. He gave a small nod, surprised by how much that meant coming from her. She stood, gathering her shawl. At the door, she paused. If I were you, I'd call the Tribune, she said. They may be slow, but they still publish truth when it matters. Then she stepped out into the morning sun, leaving behind the smell of apples and old secrets. Caleb watched her go, the pie cooling on the counter. He didn't have much of a plan yet, but now he had something he hadn't felt since the water turned red. Someone who believed him. The wooden door groaned on its hinges as Caleb pushed it open, the sound echoing through the quiet of the narrow street. A small bell overhead jingled with a reluctant ring, announcing his presence. Dust motes spun in the morning light that filtered through the warped windows, dancing over stacks of yellowing paper and rolls of newsprint piled like sleeping dogs. The Dry Creek Gazette hadn't changed much since Caleb was a boy. Same peeling paint, same cracked linoleum on the floor, same old printing press in the back that sounded like it coughed more than it printed. "Be right there," a woman's voice called from behind a wall of filing cabinets. Caleb waited, hat in hand, fingers brushing against the embroidered H still tucked in his coat pocket. Moments later, Eleanor Price appeared, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her eyes were sharp, narrowed with focus, but softened when they landed on him. "Caleb Whitmore," she said, brushing her hands on her skirt. "Didn't expect you here. What can I do for you?" "I need to talk," he said, voice low, "about something that's not just rumor." Eleanor nodded, waved him toward a chair across from her cluttered desk. He sat, laying the handkerchief down like a piece of evidence. She raised an eyebrow. "That a woman's kerchief? Founded near our well," Caleb replied, "right after pulling a dead man out of it." That made her sit a little straighter. "Sheriff Hale came out, told me not to stir trouble. Didn't call no coroner, didn't even write anything down." "Of course he didn't," she muttered. Caleb nodded to the cloth. "You see that letter?" She picked it up with the tips of her fingers, studying the red embroidery. "H for Halberg? That's what I'm thinking." Eleanor dropped into her chair with a sigh. She opened a drawer, pulled out a folder so thick it looked like it had grown roots. She flipped through clippings, articles, photographs yellowed by time. "You're not the first to say Halberg's been skulking in the shadows," she said. 10 years ago they tried buying up plots in Elk Ridge, quietly, under fake company names. When people pushed back, suddenly barns burned, wells ran dry, cattle got sick. Caleb frowned. Why didn't that make the news? She gave him a tired smile. Because the folks who talked stopped talking. And the ones who kept printing. She tapped the folder. Let's just say their ads dried up real fast. He leaned forward. "You believe they're behind this?" "I believe they don't like hearing the word no," Eleanor said. "And I believe someone's been trying awful hard to make you and your pa give up that land." The printing press in the back kicked to life with a loud clunk and a whir, like some wheezing old mule trying to find its rhythm. The rhythmic chuck, chuck, chuck filled the room, steady and oddly comforting. Caleb glanced around. This place always smell like ink and ghosts. She grinned. Only when we're on the trail of a good story. Then her eyes flicked to a small package on the far edge of the desk, half buried under junk mail and press releases. That came in this morning, she said, reaching for it. Didn't recognize the name, so I figured it was spam. She turned the envelope over and froze. The sender box read, Jonas Kepler. Caleb's blood turned cold. Open it. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She tore the flap and shook out the contents. A single photograph and a note. The photo showed a man in coveralls standing beside a drill rig in a dry canyon. His back was turned, but the name stitched on his breast pocket read, Halberg. Scrawled on the back of the photo, they're starting here. You need to see what's underneath. The note was typed, clipped from a cheap typewriter, shaky and uneven. It read, EP, if anything happens to me, don't let them bury this. Start with parcel 7B. Caleb looked at Eleanor. You know where that is? She nodded slowly, already pulling out a map from a side drawer. Her finger landed on a plot of land southeast of town, just a few miles from the Whitmore Ranch. They were drilling near there last spring, she said. And now Jonas is dead, Caleb added. They stared at each other. In the quiet that followed, even the printing press seemed to hold its breath. Whatever this is, Eleanor said, folding the letter, it's bigger than a dead man in a well. Caleb stood. You gonna print it? She gave a half smile. Not yet, but I'll dig, and when I do, I won't stop. Caleb tipped his hat. That's all I needed to hear. As he stepped back out into the morning, the door groaned shut behind him. The air smelled like newsprint and old truths clawing their way back to the surface. The fan above Sheriff Hale's desk spun in lazy, uneven circles, doing more to stir the heat than ease it. The morning sun bore down on the dry streets of Dry Creek, and inside the sheriff's office the air hung heavy, thick with sweat, dust, and something far worse, regret. Hale sat slumped at his desk, sleeves rolled up, his badge half tarnished under the weight of time and compromise. A stack of folders lay spread before him. Each bore the bold stamp of Halberg Mining and Resources in block letters. He'd meant to file them. Instead, he stared. His fingers traced the edge of one folder, Jonas Kepler's. No one had officially opened a case. No death certificate had been filed. Jonas had disappeared, and now he was dead, found in a goddamn well on Whitmore land. And still, silence. The office door creaked. Hale didn't look up. We're closed. The man who stepped inside didn't seem to care. Mid-40s, slick hair, pinstripe shirt a little too clean for Dry Creek. He didn't take off his hat, didn't wipe his boots, just walked right in like he owned the place. Sheriff, the man said, voice oiled and casual. We understand it's been a tough week. Hale said nothing. The man continued. We at Halberg appreciate the pressure your position comes with. That's why we aim to make things easier, fewer questions, quicker resolutions. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. No words written, just weight. Hale didn't touch it. The man smiled. All we're saying is, working together's always better than working against. Get out, Hale muttered. Now, Sheriff, there's no need for that tone. I said get the hell out. The man's smile didn't break. He tipped his hat with two fingers, turned, and walked out slow, boots echoing across the floorboards. When the door finally shut, Hale sat back, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He looked down at the envelope like it was something that might bite. "God-damn parasites," he whispered, then reached for the bottle of whiskey he kept in the bottom drawer. He poured 2 fingers into his mug, no ice, no hesitation, downed it in one bitter gulp. The burn did little to numb the gnawing guilt in his gut. He slammed the mug down. Son of a bitch. He rubbed his temples, sweat trickling down his temple. His eyes moved from the envelope to the window. Through the dusty glass, the town carried on. Shopkeepers opening doors, wagons rolling, dogs barking in the distance. And there, across the street, he saw him, Caleb Whitmore, standing in front of the Gazette office, holding a large manila envelope in one hand. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the buildings like he was hunting something invisible. The sun caught his silhouette, casting a long shadow across the dirt. Hale's stomach dropped. Whatever was inside that envelope, it wasn't just paper. The kid wasn't backing down. Hale slumped forward, pressing his forehead to the cool of his desk. He wasn't a bad man, not when he started. But somewhere between land grants and election posters, between chasing drunkards and pretending not to see deals go down, he'd let something rot inside him. He looked again. Caleb hadn't moved. That boy's going to dig until he finds the whole damn truth, Hale thought. And when he does, it'll bury us all. The sheriff poured another shot, slower this time, and didn't drink it. He just stared at it. Outside, the day kept rising, unforgiving and bright. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty blinds of the Dry Creek Gazette, casting long slats of light across the cluttered desk where Caleb and Eleanor sat in silence. The envelope lay between them like a loaded gun. Caleb's fingers hesitated just a second before he tore it open. The seal gave with a soft rip, and inside was a single sheet of paper, creased, crumpled, and blotched with something dark. He pulled it out, slowly. The stain was unmistakable. "Is that blood?" Eleanor asked, voice low. Caleb gave a grim nod. "Looks fresh, or fresh enough." They unfolded the page together. The paper crackled with age and tension. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, clearing her throat. "I'll read." The letter was handwritten in black ink, rushed but legible. A few words were smudged where the blood had soaked through. Eleanor began, "To whom it may concern, if anything happens to me, let it be known I did not go willingly. I have documents proving Halberg Mining bribed members of the county zoning board to secure land rights along Dry Creek. They want the Whitmore property next." Sheriff Hale was approached. He refused at first. Then he stopped talking to me altogether. Jonas Kepler. Eleanor's voice cracked on the last sentence. Caleb leaned forward, eyes hard. "That bastard was trying to blow the whistle." Eleanor nodded, still staring at the letter like it might vanish. He knew he was in danger. This explains everything." Caleb stood, pacing, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. His hands clenched at his sides. "They killed him," he said. "Dropped his body in my family's well to make a point. Like it was just a message, not a man." Eleanor set the letter down carefully, like it might crumble if she touched it wrong. "We have to be careful, Caleb. This isn't just some shady business deal. This is organized, strategic, deadly." He stopped pacing. "I don't give a damn how strategic they are. They're murderers." He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the old typewriter and stacks of back issues. "Hon Kip," he muttered through gritted teeth. "They think a warning and a corpse is enough to shut me up?" Eleanor looked at him, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" Caleb exhaled, calmer now. "I said, they think they can scare me. They're wrong." The phone on Eleanor's desk rang, sharp, sudden. They both jumped. She reached for it, hand trembling slightly. Dry Creek Gazette, she answered. Silence. Then a voice, low, mechanical, masked. Stop digging. If you want to live, click. The dial tone buzzed like static. Eleanor set the receiver down, her face pale. Caleb leaned across the desk. Who was it? Didn't say. Male or female? Could have been either. They were using something to hide their voice. He grabbed the letter again, holding it like a weapon. They're scared. That's why they're calling. That's why they're warning us. Or, Eleanor said softly, they're just getting started. Caleb didn't answer. He looked out the window, eyes scanning the empty street. Dust swirled in the golden light. And for the first time, he felt the weight of the enemy he was facing, not just a company, but a machine, one that devoured men like Jonas without a second thought. He clenched his jaw. I'm not backing down, he whispered. I'll burn every lie they've built. The church bell rang across the dusty valley, its echo rolling down Dry Creek like a call to something older than law. Older than Halberg mining and all its crooked plans. The townsfolk trickled in from all directions, dressed in their Sunday best, kids in clean boots, women with sun hats, men still smelling faintly of feed and saddle leather. The little white church, peeling and sun-bleached, stood proud at the center of it all. Caleb walked up the steps slowly, tipping his hat to Martha Dillard, who stood with a tray of steaming cornbread and a disarming smile. I brought extra, she said, patting his arm. Something tells me folks might need comfort food more than ever today. Inside, the smell of roast beef and gravy already filled the fellowship hall. Potluck Sundays in Dry Creek were less about religion and more about routine, family, and gossip. But this Sunday, tension hung in the air like the dust outside. Reverend Clark, tall and sharp-featured, stood by the pulpit, sipping coffee. He nodded as Caleb entered, gesturing for him to come over. Thought you might make it, Clark said, his voice low. Caleb shrugged, didn't want to cause a stir. Just felt like folks ought to hear some things. As the hymn ended and folding chairs squeaked with movement, Clark stepped forward. Before we eat, a word from Caleb Whitmore, son of Ezekiel, and a man with something on his chest. Caleb stood, eyes turned, silence stretched. He cleared his throat. Some of you might have heard about what we found in our well. Murmurs rippled. It wasn't an accident. Jonas Kepler didn't just fall in. He was put there. And it wasn't just to scare me or my pa. A woman in the back raised her hand. They tried to buy our land last year. Real pushy. Sent letters every week. Another voice joined in. They told us they'd guarantee safety if we signed over early. Clark stepped back as Caleb continued. They're moving fast. They want Dry Creek emptied out. This town ain't just a speck on the map to them. It's a line on some blueprint. Martha stood up. My Frank worked those mines before they shut 'em down. Told me once, when a corporation wants something, they don't ask twice. Clark took his place again. Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for someone to save us. We got strength right here. He gestured around the room, at the farmers, the teachers, the shop owners. They divide us because they're afraid of what we can do together. A beat. Then old Joe Langley, a retired cattleman with a bad hip and a worse temper, slapped his hand on the table. Well, I'll be damned if some city men think they can scare us off our land. Voices rose. Agreement echoed. For once, the potluck smelled less of mashed potatoes and more of fire in the belly. Caleb looked around and realized he wasn't alone anymore. Then, through the dusty window, he noticed a dark pickup truck parked at the far edge of the church lot. Engine off, windows tinted, too clean for Dry Creek. He moved toward the door, narrowing his eyes. The truck lingered a moment longer, then rolled off slowly, tires crunching gravel in silence. He said nothing, but his hand unconsciously moved to the worn handle of the knife on his belt. Trouble didn't need to speak. It knew how to watch. And wait. The wind howled low and lonesome across the dry plain, slipping through cracks in the wood and moaning against the rafters like an old ghost looking for a home. On the porch of the Whitmore ranch house, Ezekiel sat hunched over, the tip of his cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. His hands trembled slightly, either from the cold or the weight of what he wasn't saying. The boards beneath his boots creaked as Caleb stepped out from the kitchen, mug of coffee in one hand, jaw tight. He leaned against the post, watching his father in silence. "You ain't slept," Caleb finally said. Ezekiel didn't look up, didn't plan to. Caleb took a long sip and stared out into the night. The wind carried with it the distant bark of dogs and the metallic groan of something loose on the barn. They were watching us. At church. Ezekiel flicked the ash off the end of his cigarette, saying nothing. "You gonna pretend you don't care?" Caleb snapped, unable to contain it any longer. "You act like if we keep quiet, they'll leave us be. That what you really believe, Pa?" Ezekiel took another drag, exhaled slow. "You think talking will save us? You think poking the bear makes you a man? That's not what I said." "No," Ezekiel muttered, finally glancing up, his eyes shadowed and tired. "But it's what you're doing. Stirring shit, dragging the family into it." Caleb's temper flared. "So we just sit here, pretend nothing's wrong while they kill folks and dump them in our well?" Ezekiel flinched but didn't speak. "You always said this land mattered, that it's in our blood. But when it counts, you just light another smoke and keep your damn mouth shut." "I'm trying to protect you," Ezekiel said, voice cracking. "You think this world plays fair? You think anyone's coming to save us if things go south?" Caleb's voice rose. "Then why live like we already lost?" Ezekiel looked away. The silence between them grew heavy, soaked in generations of fear and pride and unspoken pain. Caleb took a step forward, fists clenched. "Keeping quiet don't make you brave, Pa. It just makes you complicit." Ezekiel's cigarette slipped from his fingers, smoldering out on the porch floor. "Nup mitten la dung kung chung, cha biet kung," Caleb growled, forgetting for a moment that English was the language of the fight. But pain had a way of reaching into a man's gut, no matter what tongue it spoke. Inside the house, something hit the front door with a soft thud. Both men turned. Caleb moved first, stepping over the burnt-out cigarette and pulling the door open. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, had been shoved through the gap. He picked it up, unfolded it, under the porch light. "Next time it won't be a warning." There was no signature, just a smear of dirt and something darker, rust-colored, at the corner. Behind him, one of the ranch dogs let out a low, guttural growl, its hackles raised toward the wind. A second dog barked sharply, pacing near the fence line. Ezekiel rose, slowly, his face pale. "Damn it," Caleb muttered, crumpling the note. "They're not bluffing." The two men stood in silence for a moment longer, the night pressing in around them. The porch light flickered. The old brass bell atop Dry Creek's town hall rang out 12 sharp notes, each echo bouncing down Main Street like a call to arms. Folks crowded the narrow steps and shuffled through the double doors, sweat beading on foreheads and tempers already stretched tight. Inside, the hall was sweltering. Ceiling fans spun with lazy resistance, creaking above the worn wood floor and rows of folding chairs packed with familiar faces. Someone passed out paper fans stamped with the town's seal, but they did little more than push hot air around. Caleb stood near the front, Eleanor by his side, clutching the envelope with Jonas Kepler's blood-stained letter. Behind them sat Sheriff Hale, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. Across the aisle, two men in clean-cut suits with Halberg mining pins gleamed under their lapels. Their smiles were tight, calculated. Reverend Clark offered a brief prayer, more habit than comfort, then stepped aside. Caleb walked to the front, holding the letter high. The room quieted. "This letter," he began, voice firm, "was written by Jonas Kepler. Many of you knew him. He didn't leave town. He didn't run. He died because he tried to tell the truth." A murmur rolled through the room like thunder in the distance. Caleb unfolded the page and read aloud. Every word struck like a nail in dry wood. "If anything happens to me, let it be known I did not go willingly. Halberg Mining bribed members of the county zoning board to secure land rights. They want the Whitmore property next." Gasps, shuffling feet, whispers between neighbors. One of the Halberg men stood, smoothing his blazer. "These are serious accusations, and entirely unsubstantiated. Mr. Kepler was a troubled man. We have no knowledge of this letter, or any wrongdoing by our company." Eleanor raised a brow. "Of course you don't." The other man jumped in. "This town stands on the brink of opportunity, jobs, growth. We came to bring Dry Creek into the future, not fight ghosts." Someone in the crowd scoffed. "Then why are folks turning up dead?" From the corner, a clerk named Donnie, skin pale and collar soaked with sweat, rose slowly. His voice wavered. I signed off on some of those zoning changes," he confessed. "They said it was just paperwork, said it didn't matter, but they paid cash, a lot of it." His words hung in the air like smoke. The room erupted, shouting, accusations. Some stood with Caleb. Others hesitated, eyes darting between the Halberg suits and the sheriff, unsure who to trust. Sheriff Hale hadn't moved. He stared at Donnie with something between pity and disgust. "We've been sold out," someone cried. "No, we've been scared silent," another barked back. A chair scraped loudly against the floor. Eleanor tried to speak, but her voice was drowned in the rising noise. Then, darkness. The lights cut out with a heavy clunk, plunging the room into pitch black. For a split second, all was still. Then chaos. A voice shouted, angry and sharp, "Who turned off the goddamn lights?" A crash. Someone tripped over a folding chair. A baby cried out. A scuffle broke out in the back corner. Caleb's hand went to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of his knife. He turned toward the sound of Eleanor's voice, barely audible in the confusion. "We have to get out," she hissed. Another voice, deeper, unfamiliar, called through the dark. "Shut it down or pay the price." The town hall had turned into a powder keg, and someone just struck the match. The moment the lights died, panic surged like a stampede. Someone screamed. A folding chair clattered to the floor. Boots pounded across the wooden planks as the crowd surged and scattered. Then came the unmistakable sound of glass shattering, sharp, violent, the front window blown in from the outside. Caleb crouched instinctively, his breath caught. Through the scattered chaos, he heard Eleanor gasp beside him, her hand reaching for his arm. "Stay low," he muttered, his voice firm. All around them, flashlights flickered to life, weak beams slicing through the dust and darkness like uncertain knives. The heavy ceiling fans still turned overhead, whining uselessly. "Goddamn bastards planned this," someone shouted from the back. A woman cried out, "They've got guns! I saw one of them out there." "No one's got guns inside," Caleb barked, raising his voice above the din. "No one shoots, no one dies. Just breathe." But fear wasn't logical. Fear had its own rhythm. One man started to pray. Another cursed loudly, fumbling for his flashlight. The air smelled like sweat and tension, and something else. Gun oil? Caleb couldn't be sure. Then, through the noise came a voice, raw, ragged, rising from the far end of the room. "I saw them!" the man yelled. "I saw 'em dump Jonas into the well. 2 of 'em, wearing halberd coats, same bastards who came to my house last month." Silence dropped like a hammer. Even in the chaos, truth had a way of cutting through. Eleanor stood frozen, her face lit faintly by a beam of shaky light. "Who said that?" she called. The man stepped forward, face half in shadow. "Name's Peter Foley. I didn't speak 'cause I got a kid, but I can't live with it no more." Gasps. Whispers. Someone near the door muttered, "Son of a bitch." Sheriff Hale pushed forward, flashlight in hand, his badge catching a glint. "You willing to put that in writing?" Peter nodded, sweat dripping down his face. "I will. But you better damn protect my family." Caleb turned toward the back, where shadows danced beyond the broken window. "This was a warning," he said quietly to Eleanor. "They cut the power, threw something to break the window. They wanted chaos." She swallowed hard, "And they got it." He nodded grimly, "But they also got exposed." The doors banged open with a crash that sent several folks ducking again. Red and blue lights pulsed against the walls. Whoop, whoop! The police sirens now slicing the night. Outside, cruisers skidded to a halt. The spinning beams of red and blue flashed across faces, across dust in the air, across the broken glass. "Dry Creek PD, make way!" came the shout. Someone in the crowd whispered, "About damn time." But Caleb didn't move. His hand hovered over the envelope still tucked in his coat. Jonas's letter. The truth they tried to silence. Behind him, someone muttered under their breath, "Fucking bastards, trying to scare us into silence." The room, dimly lit by flashlights and police strobes, now felt like a battlefield at the edge of something bigger. The community had fractured, but in that fracture, light was bleeding in. Hale looked over at Caleb, eyes heavy. "They're not going to stop now," he said. Caleb nodded. "Then neither do we." The sun hadn't fully risen, but the Gazette office was already stifling. The air sat heavy, pressing down through the rafters like a warning. Eleanor pushed open the door, her arms full of notes, but the second she stepped inside, her body froze. The printing press, usually clattering, grumbling like an old mule by this hour, sat silent, too silent. She dropped her bag, walked to the back room, and her eyes locked onto the tangled cords dangling from the press like severed veins. The power line had been cut, clean, intentional. "Goddamn sons of bitches," she muttered, her voice tight with rage. Caleb entered behind her, holding 2 coffees. He saw the look on her face, then followed her gaze to the machine. "No mistaking it," he said. They knew exactly where to slice. Eleanor ran a hand through her hair, already damp from the heat. First the blackout at town hall, now this. They're not just scaring people, they're choking the truth. She picked up the phone, dialed the ink supplier. It rang once, then a clipped voice answered. Dry Creek Gazette, she said. This is Eleanor Price. Our ink shipment was due yesterday. A pause, then, I'm sorry, ma'am, we won't be able to fulfill that order. Corporate decision. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around the receiver. Bullshit. You've been delivering to us since Reagan was in office. I don't make the rules. It's out of my hands. She slammed the phone down, a string of curses tumbling out under her breath. Caleb leaned against the desk, watching her. They're bleeding us dry, she said, and we haven't even printed a damn headline. Caleb set the coffee beside her and pulled a folded flyer from his coat. Then we don't use their press. We go old school, handbills, flyers, whatever we can do ourselves. Eleanor blinked, staring at him like he'd suggested using smoke signals. I know it sounds crazy, he continued, but it worked during the war. Word of mouth, hand to hand. We print a few hundred copies, just enough to stir the pot. Eleanor's jaw tightened. What good's a few hundred when we need thousands? Caleb smiled. One copy in the right hand can light a fire. As if summoned by fate, the bell above the door jingled. Martha Dillard stepped inside, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Her eyes were sharp beneath her straw hat. I brought something, she said, fishing into her bag. She pulled out a worn manila envelope and set it on the desk. I kept a copy of that letter Jonas gave me years ago. He trusted me, you know. Said if anything ever happened to him, someone had to speak up. Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a crisp carbon copy of Jonas's letter, free of blood, legible in full. She looked up, eyes glassy. This is gold. Martha nodded. I figured you might need it now. Eleanor walked to the desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of ink and an old manual stamper. We'll do it by hand. Damn the press. Damn the suppliers. We'll make our own damn news. Caleb leaned over, inspecting the block letters on the stamper. We'll start with Jonas's letter, he said. Then every name, every bribe, every thread we can pull. And we pass it out at the county fair this weekend. Eleanor paused, fingers hovering over the roller. You sure that's smart? They'll be watching. Caleb met her gaze. They're always watching. But the fair's public, crowded, loud. They can't stop a whisper when it turns into a chorus. Eleanor exhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the old black and white photo on the wall. Her first day at the Gazette, young, proud, ink smudged on her cheek. I made a promise to myself that day, she said softly. No matter how dirty it got out there, the truth wouldn't die on my watch. Caleb nodded. Let's make sure it doesn't. The moon hung low and cold, casting a ghostly sheen across the porch. The old wooden floor creaked as Caleb stepped outside, drawn by the soft rasp of his name. Caleb, Ezekiel said, his voice brittle. He sat in his usual spot, hunched forward, elbows on knees, a cigarette trembling between two fingers. His face was hollow in the moonlight, like the years had finally caught up and punched right through him. Caleb leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. The silence between them, thick and tired, stretched long. I've been thinking, Ezekiel began, not looking up. Too damn much, maybe. Caleb didn't answer. He let the man speak. There's something you need to hear. Something I should have told you a long time ago. He paused, took a drag, and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling like guilt from his lips. After your ma died, things got tight, real tight. I didn't show it, but I was scared, son. Scared we'd lose the land, lose every damn thing your granddad worked for. Caleb's jaw clenched. He'd heard fragments of this story before, but not in this tone, not with the weight it carried now. That's when Halberg first came sniffin'. Sent a smooth bastard named Varnas, wore cologne and crocodile boots,
sat right where you're standing now and offered me a stack of cash just to keep quiet. Said there was nothing to worry about, just business. He let the cigarette burn down between his fingers. I took it, Ezekiel said quietly. Took the money. Caleb didn't move, didn't breathe. Ezekiel looked up, eyes wet. It ate me up. Every day since, I told myself I was protecting you, the land, our name, but it was cowardice. Plain and simple. Silence again, broken only by the faint rustle of the cottonwoods. Last month, Ezekiel continued, voice cracking, they sent him again. Varnes said they'd pay more if I signed over water rights. I told him to go to hell, called him a bastard to his face, told him if he set foot on my porch again, I'd shoot him myself. Caleb took a slow step forward, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. I'll stand with you, boy, Ezekiel said, finally meeting his son's eyes. At the next town meeting, I'll tell him what I did. Tell him everything. Caleb swallowed hard. Something inside him shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something like it. He walked over and sat beside his father. For a moment, they didn't speak. Then, from the darkness beyond the fence, came the sudden thud of something landing in the yard. Caleb shot to his feet. He jogged down the steps and crossed the patchy grass. A manila envelope lay in the dirt, the flaps still fluttering from the throw. He bent down, picked it up. 3 words scrawled across the front in block letters. Shut up, old man. Inside, a single page with no letterhead, no signature, just a photo, grainy, black and white, of Ezekiel sitting on the porch, unaware, taken from the road. Caleb's hands balled into fists. He turned back toward the porch. Ezekiel hadn't moved, but his face was stone now, hard as fence post iron. They don't get to scare us, Caleb said. Not anymore. Ezekiel stood, slower than he used to, but steady. I ain't scared, he replied. Not when I'm on the right side. Caleb put a hand on his father's shoulder, firm. For the first time in years they weren't arguing, weren't bitter shadows of themselves. They were standing on the same side of the fire. Dry Creek was alive with color and sound. From the town square to the edge of the fairgrounds, laughter rose above the hum of conversation, mingling with the twang of a banjo, echoing off the food stands. The smell of slow-cooked brisket, fried onions, and sweet kettle corn wafted through the summer air. Banners fluttered, kids chased each other with sticky fingers, and somewhere a mechanical bull growled to life with a loud clang. It was the biggest turnout the county fair had seen in years. Caleb adjusted the stack of hand-folded flyers under his arm, eyes scanning the crowd. Beside him, Eleanor fanned herself with the brim of her sun hat, sweat glistening at her temples. We picked the right place, she said. If we want ears, they're all here. They're also here to forget about their damn troubles, Caleb muttered. Let's hope they'll listen anyway. They split up, weaving through the fairgrounds. Caleb handed flyers to young men in denim overalls and elderly women holding lemonade cups. Some folks nodded politely. Others paused to read right there. A few handed them back without a word. Eleanor took a more practiced route, sliding a flyer between plates of pie at the judging table, leaving a stack on the picnic bench near the fried pickle truck. Meanwhile, Martha Dillard had set up her table near the church booth, the scent of her apple cinnamon tarts drawing a steady stream of fairgoers. But she wasn't just selling sweets. They tried to shut Jonas up, she said to one customer, a wide-eyed teenager holding a soda. He came to me last spring, said he was scared. said Halberg was up to something rotten. Another woman leaned in, listening. They killed him, Martha said plainly, and dumped him like he was nothing. That's who's coming for our land. Caleb passed nearby and gave her a nod. Martha winked, her hands never stopping, as she packaged up slices and slipped flyers into brown paper bags. By mid-afternoon, the mood had shifted.
Near the music stage, Reverend Clark took the microphone, tapping it gently. The band quieted. "I'm not one to preach at a fair," he said with a wry smile, "but some things can't wait for Sunday." People stilled, drawn in. We are a town of farmers, ranchers, mothers and sons. This land, your land, has history and blood and memory in it. Don't sell that away to men who ain't never walked it. Scattered applause broke out. Then more. Soon the crowd clapped in unison, some stomping boots into the dry grass. Caleb held up a sign that read, "Our water, our land, our fight." Others joined. Homemade posters rose above the heads, "Stop Halberg" and "Justice for Jonas." For the first time, Caleb saw it clearly. The town wasn't just scared anymore. They were angry and united. But unity had a price. Near the Ferris wheel, a group of strangers stood still while the rest of the crowd cheered. 4 men, clean shirts, expensive boots. One took a flyer, sneered, and ripped it in half. He locked eyes with Caleb as the paper fluttered to the ground. Caleb stared back, unmoving. Another man nudged his companion, nodded toward Eleanor. The message was clear. We see you. We know. Back by the food trucks, a dusty old pickup rumbled to life. The radio inside crackled, just loud enough for nearby ears to catch the words. Halberg Mining has announced a major expansion to its operations in Dry Creek County. Caleb heard it. So did Eleanor. Her face went pale. "Damn," she whispered. "They're not backing off. They're doubling down." Caleb looked around. The signs, the voices, the movement. It had all begun. But the storm was only starting. He tightened his grip on the last few flyers, shoulders squared. "We push harder," he said, "and we don't stop." The patrol car idled on the side of a dirt road, headlights cutting through a haze of dust and bugs. Sheriff Hale sat motionless, one hand gripping the wheel, the other resting inches from his sidearm lying in the seat beside him. Outside, the night pressed in, quiet, dry and still. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the kind that sat heavy on a man's chest, made him reckon with things he'd spent too long avoiding. The bottle of whiskey in the glove compartment called to him, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he lit a cigarette with trembling fingers and stared out at the nothing. His mind wandered back to a time years ago when he'd first worn the badge, when Jonas Kepler still rode in the passenger seat on their evening rounds. Young, straight-backed, always talking too much. "Law don't mean shit to folks with money," Jonas had said once, spitting out the window as they passed a white-fenced ranch. "But we enforce it anyway. That's the job." Back then, Hill had thought he understood what justice looked like. Simple, black and white. You catch the bad guy, write the report, go home. Now he wasn't sure what the hell he was doing anymore. The Halberg files lay thick in his lap, reports that never got filed, complaints that never went anywhere, bribes that had been hinted at, never proven. For too long, he'd closed his eyes and told himself it was survival, that he was keeping the town calm, protecting people from a fight they couldn't win. But Jonas was dead, and that blood was in the water, in Hale's throat. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, letting out a guttural growl. God damn it! The car rocked slightly with the force. A possum darted across the road, startled by the sound. He sat back, breathing heavy. The cigarette burned nearly to the filter. It wasn't just guilt eating at him anymore. It was the feeling of being a coward, of standing still while others bled, while the town split in two right under his watch. He glanced at the glove box again, then back at the folder. Instead of drinking, he grabbed the keys and turned off the engine. Silence rushed in. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the door, boots crunching gravel as he stood. He walked around to the trunk, popped it open, and dug through a stack of old case files. There, shoved behind boxes of forgotten warrants, was the folder he'd buried 6 months ago. Inside were Jonas Kepler's signed statements, photos of Halberg reps visiting officials after hours, receipts of sudden donations to town council members, and, most damning, an audio tape, one where a Halberg lawyer promised compensation for discretion. Hale held it all in his hands, the weight of truth heavier than any gun. He didn't want to be a martyr. He didn't want to be a hero, but he sure as hell didn't want to be the sheriff who stood by and watched a town rot. He climbed back into the driver's seat and grabbed his phone. Caleb answered on the second ring. "It's Hale," he said, voice low but steady.
"Meet me at the church." A pause, then, "You bringing what I think you are?" "I'm bringing it all," Hale said. "We're done hiding." He hung up without waiting for a reply. As he sat back, alone again in the darkness, the full weight of what he was doing settled in. His job, his name, his life. All of it would be on the line. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like a man again. The old Dry Creek church, usually still and solemn, blazed with warm light that spilled out into the dusty street. Candles flickered along every windowsill, and the heavy wooden pews were packed. Men in worn denim, women clutching their shawls, kids squirming in laps. The hum of whispers filled the sanctuary, thick with questions and anticipation. Something was about to happen. Everyone knew it. Caleb stood near the pulpit, his fingers twitching at his sides. He glanced to his left where Eleanor clutched a stack of papers, her mouth a thin line. To his right, Ezekiel sat stiffly, hat in his hands, face pale, but resolute. Sheriff Hale leaned against the back wall, arms crossed over a manila folder so thick it looked like it might burst. The entire town had shown up. Even old widow Martha, wrapped in a thick wool coat, sat near the front with red-rimmed eyes. Reverend Clark stood behind the pulpit, offering only a nod to Caleb. It was time. Hale cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Folks," he began, voice rasped and dry. "I ain't gonna pretend this is easy for me, but I've got something you need to see." He opened the folder and began pulling out the documents, photos, receipts, statements. He passed them to the front rows, watching as papers were handed down. Eyes widened, mouths fell open. "This here," Hale continued, "is proof that Halberg Mining's been buying off town officials, threatening locals, and worse." Gasps rippled. Someone cursed under their breath. Ezekiel slowly rose from his seat. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I took their hush money. Once. I told myself it was for the ranch, for Caleb.
I told myself it didn't mean anything. He paused, swallowing hard. But it did. It meant I stood by while good men like Jonas were silenced. The silence was suffocating. Then Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking as she read aloud from the article she'd written. Each word carved into the air like stone. When profit outweighs principle, we all bleed. Dry Creek deserves better than to be bought and buried. She lowered the paper. For a moment, no one moved. Then Reverend Clark raised his hands and said simply, "Let us pray, not for vengeance, but for justice." Heads bowed. When the prayer ended, it was as if a fuse had been lit. Voices rose, some angry, some tearful, but all united. "No more silence! Kick 'em out! This is our home!" The church swelled with chants, the pews trembling beneath stamping boots. Caleb felt Martha's hand slip into his. She pulled him into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're your father's son," she whispered, "but better." Through the commotion, the front doors creaked open. A suited man from Halberg stepped in, flanked by two others. He looked around with the cold calm of a man used to owning rooms. "So," he said, loud enough to cut through the noise, "you think this ends here?" The crowd quieted. He smirked, dropped a folded note onto the floor, and turned. "One thing about that well, Whitmore," he said over his shoulder. "You sure it's empty?" The doors slammed behind them. A shiver passed through the room. Caleb bent to pick up the note. It was blank on one side. On the other, scrawled in dark ink, "Careful where you dig." The church, just moments ago electric with defiance, fell into murmurs again. But something had changed. Fear was still there, yes, but it was met with resolve. They weren't alone anymore. The first rays of dawn stretched over Dry Creek like a warm, forgiving hand. The sky blushed soft peach and gold, and the land exhaled cool air after the long, tense nights. On the Whitmore ranch, dew clung to the grass, shimmering under the light. Caleb stood at the old well, rope in hand. He lowered the bucket slowly, listening as it descended into the dark. The creak of the pulley echoed softly across the yard. A few feet away, Ezekiel stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Behind them, townsfolk had begun to gather. Martha, Reverend Clark, Eleanor, and more. Word had spread that today the well would be cleaned, renewed. Caleb tugged the rope. A splash echoed up. He waited. Then slowly he cranked it back up. The bucket emerged, dripping with water so clear it seemed to glow, reflecting the soft sunlight like glass. He lifted it high, droplets catching in the light. Murmurs broke into applause. Martha wiped her eyes. Eleanor smiled wide. Clark whispered a quiet prayer under his breath. "It's clean," Caleb said softly, almost to himself. Beside him, Ezekiel stepped forward. He didn't say much, never did, but he placed a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. For a moment, they stood there in silence, a bridge finally built over years of distance. Then, to Caleb's surprise, Ezekiel smiled, a real one, the kind that reached his eyes. "This well fed your granddad's cattle," he said quietly. "Fed you when you were just a sprout." He paused. "Now it feeds all of us again." One by one, folks moved forward, carrying scrub brushes, rope, tools. Some climbed down with care. Others hauled buckets to scrub the stone walls, remove debris. Someone patched the old crank housing. Kids chased each other around the edge, giggling, their laughter rising like bird song. Reverend Clark organized a small blessing at noon. He spoke not of vengeance, but of renewal. "This water," he said, "is more than just a drink. It's our bond, our hope.
Near the porch, Martha handed out slices of apple pie. "Fresh batch," she said proudly. "Got a little cinnamon this time." Eleanor wandered over with a notepad. "Not writing today," she said when Caleb looked at her. "Just watching. Sometimes the truth doesn't need printing. It just needs remembering." The sun rose higher, warming the backs of those who still worked. As Caleb watched the laughter and sweat and unity around the well, he felt something shift deep in his chest. The fear had gone. The silence was broken. The land, once under threat, now felt alive again, not because Halberg was gone, but because the people had chosen to stand together. He dipped the bucket again, watched it fill, then raised it and turned to the group. "This," he said, holding it high, "ain't just water," they quieted, listening. "This is justice." Martha let out a soft, "Amen." A few others nodded. Someone began to hum a tune. Someone else joined. Before long, a low, sweet song carried through the breeze. No one noticed the black truck driving down the road outside the ranch. It didn't stop, didn't slow, just kept going, dust curling behind it like a retreating storm cloud. Back by the well, Ezekiel leaned against the fence, watching his son. His face was calm now, shoulders no longer burdened by secrets or shame. "You done good, boy," he said. Caleb just smiled and nodded, eyes still on the water. Across the yard, children ran barefoot. Dogs barked. Someone started talking about planting early this season. Another mentioned rebuilding the grain silo. Life was moving again, not loud or flashy, just steady, like the turning of the earth. And in the middle of it all, the well stood, silent, patient, and finally, clear. Sometimes the deepest truths lie at the bottom of a well, and not just the kind filled with water. This story reminds us that corruption doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes it's dressed in uniforms, suits, or even the silence of those we love. What Caleb and the people of Dry Creek teach us is this: standing up for what's right isn't always loud. It's steady, it's painful, but it's powerful. Justice doesn't arrive on a horse. Sometimes it crawls out of a well covered in dirt and truth. What would you have done if you were Caleb? Would you have stayed quiet or fought back? Let's talk in the comments. If this story made you reflect, comment number 1 below. Watching from a small town or big city? Tell us where you're from. Got a different take? We want to hear it. And if you love stories that dig deep, literally and emotionally, make sure to subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you don't miss the next one.